Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Jade Keyson, and I'm the machine behind the Food and Agriculture Action Coalition Towards Sovereignty, or you can call us FAACTS. We are a new-ish food justice coalition in San Francisco. Popped up during the pandemic to do budget advocacy for 30 plus member organizations, and now we're pushing the city to commit to developing a long-term food system plan. Today's webinar is about corporate consolidation in our supermarket industry and how it impacts local food access. So to kick us off, just a few stats. This is provided by the Berkeley Food Institute. So in 1982, independent grocers represented more than half of all U.S. grocery sales. That figure today has fallen to roughly 22%. Between 2000 and 2023, the four largest grocery parent companies went from controlling about 42% of the market to nearly 67%. These conditions don't just happen by accident. In the early 1980s, the Reagan administration effectively stopped enforcing the Robinson-Patman Act, which allowed large grocery chains to secure massive supplier discounts, ones that weren't available to their smaller independent competitors. So this led to distributors prioritizing these larger supermarkets and larger entities over smaller independent local grocers. So they were forced to close their doors. And the impact of this consolidation is felt deeply in our marginalized communities. Today, 50% of Black neighborhoods nationally lack a supermarket or full-service grocery store. In San Francisco, that looks like within the next 2 years, we will have lost 3 full-service grocery stores. We already lost the Fillmore Safeway. There's another one closing on Fulton, and we lost the Lucky Union Bay District. So these corporate grocers often cite theft or profitability as reasons for these exits, but we know that corporate consolidation is also part of that story, and that's what we want to talk about today. So to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Melanie Canales from RAFI's Challenging Corporate Power project manager. Melanie's going to talk to us about a tool that they developed called the Grocery Gap Atlas, why it was developed, and how we can potentially use it, and what it tells us. So, Melanie, I'd like to kick it off to you. And do you want me to present the slides, or do you want to
I think I
control
can
them?
share these slides. I'm going to try to do that right now, actually. Let's see. Okay, yes, I think I can do that. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Ah, excellent. Okay. Hi, everyone. I will introduce myself a little bit more. Jade actually asked me for a bio yesterday, and I completely forgot to do it, but that's okay because I can introduce myself. Hello, my name is Melanie Canales. I work at RAFI as their Challenging Corporate Power project manager on their policy team. RAFI is a North Carolina based nonprofit working towards a more just and equitable food system. And we do this by supporting farmers both in the region, in the Southeast, and across the whole country. We do that a few different ways. We do things like technical assistance, helping farmers access federal resources like the FSA, NRCS, USDA. We help them figure out their farm viability for years to come, and we also do a lot of policy advocacy work, which is the team that I'm on. And specifically, my area is in challenging corporate power, as the title suggests. Most recently, this has looked like grocery consolidation across the country. The reason that we got into that, and I'll go into this in the presentation a little bit more, was because we have an area of RAFI that does specifically food access work. But when we were working with our farmers, a lot of the things that we were hearing from them was we were having a lot of trouble accessing markets, and we were curious as to why that is. So, without further ado, I will kick us off into this presentation. So, the Grocery Gap Atlas. What is it? It is a very Let me just say this. It is a geospatial analysis tool measuring the impact of corporate consolidation of the grocery industry on food access. In other words, it's a map. It is a map that we developed with the University of Chicago and the Data Science Institute at the University of Chicago to accomplish some of these goals. We wanted to visualize data to better understand market consolidation on food access. And we wanted to be able to report data at various scales to uncover trends and intersections in inequities across the country. This map can be viewed on a national, state, county, and even census tract level. So you can really get reports from all across the country on very different scales. We wanted to make clean data accessible for download and further exploration. So any of the data that you see there is publicly accessible and shareable. So it's not like you need to pay a fee in order to access the data. And we ultimately want this data to be used for research and to advocate for solutions to build a better food system through equity and accountability. So sort of the big overarching question is, what did we learn after building this tool? And we started with a hypothesis that the more concentrated or dominated a region got by a particular corporate grocery chain, the worse food access got. And the data reflected this. When corporate consolidation increases, food access decreases. So we can take a look at a screen grab of this map, and you will see that there are a few different ways of filtering this map. This is one of them. You'll see that there is a scale on the bottom right corner that goes from kind of very, very light pink, almost white, to a dark kind of magenta color. And that gradient shows us the different levels of concentration that exist across the country, with very, very light being lower on the lower end of concentrated. There's a little bit more competition, a little bit more presence of different kinds of grocery stores. And then at the bottom, it is very concentrated, maybe divided between one or two maximum. And you can see that there are areas that are pretty light and white, but for the most part, there is a heavy presence of pink and magenta. You'll see here we use a CR4 ratio to measure how dominant not countries, companies are in the grocery industry. And as of 2000, 42.5% of all of the money going into the grocery industry were dominated by 4 main players. That's a little bit less than half of all of the money going into grocery in 2000. If we fast forward 23 years, we see that our CR4 ratio is now at 67%. So almost 2/3 of the money going into grocery ended up going to 4 major corporations. This is a huge leap in the course of only 23 years. We have another filter here that will show us the food access ratios across the country. And this is apart from concentration. We'll put those two metrics together in a minute. But this is just to show you sort of a big picture overview of how food access looks across the country. And as you can guess, the red areas are areas in crisis that are considered food apartheid regions, and the areas in blue have a little bit better food access. And for the most part, the areas that are in blue are metropolitan centers, areas that have, for a variety of reasons, better food access based on commutability, on density, on a number of different types of grocery stores that exist in the region. You'll see that in Los Angeles, Chicago, and the New York City kind of metro east area. But for the most part, especially in these rural west areas, you see very high levels of poor food access. And as you radiate further out from metropolitan centers, going from suburban or urban to peri-urban, suburban, and further out, you see food access get a little bit worse and a little bit worse. This was in the year 2000. If we fast forward a little bit in 2020, we see that some areas have started to gain a little bit more red, a little bit more orange, a little bit more yellow. You see a little bit more targeting in areas, and you see what this kind of suggests is that food access slowly has been getting a little bit worse and a little bit worse over the last 20 years. This brings us to our bivariate view. This map combines market concentration data and food access data so that we can visualize them at the same time. You'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, there is like a little diamond with a few different colors in it. And this will help us evaluate what data we're actually seeing here on the map. So if you look to the left of that diamond, you'll see in pink is where market concentration is at its highest. So an area that has maybe one grocery store, usually like a Walmart or a Dollar General. And that is the only place or the only company that exists in that area. And then to the far right of that diamond, you'll see a turquoise color indicating poor food access. That means that an area in this kind of turquoise color may not be experiencing high levels of concentration, but for whatever reason, they are experiencing very high levels of poor food access. And at the very top of this triangle in that sort of navy color are what we call areas of most concern. These are areas where market concentration is at its highest and food access is at its lowest. If you look at this map, you'll see that this navy color pretty much dominates the west half of the country. So about 50% of the country is already in that area of most concern. You'll also kind of see it happening here. I don't know if you can see my cursor pointing this out, but you'll see it also in sort of Appalachian regions, in the Mississippi Delta, and sort of at the borders of the country. And again, you'll see this kind of targeting phenomenon happening in metropolitan areas where there are areas that are very concentrated but may not have great food access, or vice versa. So now that we have kind of gotten a feel for what our map is trying to show us and how data appears on the map, we can add some additional filters to get an even clearer picture of what we're talking about when we talk about market concentration, or who we're talking about when we're talking about impacted communities. So there is a filter on this map that can tell you what percentage of the population in a given region are receiving, for example, SNAP benefits. All of the yellow on the map right now are showing, I believe, 25% or more of the population are receiving SNAP benefits as of 2020. And you can see that this is very heavy in some of the dark blue regions that we were talking about, particularly in the Mississippi Delta, in Appalachia, as well as on the West Coast. That we can also filter by corporate control. So, for example, all of the areas in yellow here are areas where 30% or more of the market share in grocery is captured by Kroger. So 30% of all of the money that is spent in grocery in these yellow areas goes straight to Kroger. It doesn't go to a community grocery store. It doesn't circulate back into the local economy. It disappears into a corporate grocery entity. And I don't know if anyone was familiar with this. A few years ago, Kroger and Albertsons, the parent company of Safeway, were planning to merge. It was a very controversial move that was fought at the FTC level, and ultimately they decided that it was illegal for them to merge. But if you see this map here, and you see this is about 30% of Kroger's market share, and then if we go to the next slide, this is 30% of Albertsons' market share. Had these two companies merged, this yellow area would have doubled. So their market share hold across the country would have been so much larger than it already is as the two companies exist apart. So having competition is so crucial to making sure that one company doesn't dominate a particular area and exacerbate the conditions that already exist there. As you can see, this is about 30% of Albertsons' market share. We have a bunch of it here in the sort of northeast corner of the country, as well as along the west coast of the country. And as Jade said, you have been seeing some divestment of Safeways across San Francisco. Albertson is the parent company of Safeway. So really, when we talk about market concentration, whenever we see a store get divested, it's usually cited for reasons of like, it's not profitable or there's too much theft. But really, it is a financial decision to decide who gets access to this grocery store as it is most profitable to us. It is not a decision based on serving the community, making sure people are fed. It is purely a profit analysis decision made by a company. And as we can see, Albertsons is doing pretty well on the West Coast. It has a pretty strong market share across that region. I don't know if there are a ton of Dollar Generals in San Francisco, particularly, but I always like to show this graphic because Dollar General's hold in grocery is so specific and so strong, and it barely qualifies as a grocery store, but they do qualify as a grocery store. They offer produce, they offer canned goods, but the way that they do that is by undercutting all of the producers they work with and all of the other grocery stores around them because their prices are so low. And as a result, they end up capturing so much of the market share because they drive out all of the other competition around them. And it makes it so that the only place that people can get any kind of produce, putting aside whether it's fresh, whether it's nutritious, whether it's locally sourced, whether it's safe, this is the only place that they can get it. So this is 30% or more of Dollar General's market share. And my personal favorite, this is 30% or more of Walmart's market share. I love showing this one, especially in person, because everyone gasps, everyone like clutches their pearls, and it is horrifying. And this build has been occurring over the last 25 or so years. Walmart's market share was a fraction of this 20 years ago, and even before it was even smaller before that. So Walmart's exponential growth has been predicated specifically on driving out competition around them and making it so that they have created the concentrated conditions that benefit them specifically over the interests of the communities that they are situated in. Okay, now that we have kind of seen the landscape that we are living in the grocery industry, we ask ourselves who is actually impacted by these conditions, who is seeing the worst of food access issues and concentration issues. Now, the data reflects that these populations are the people who are experiencing the highest levels of market concentration and poor food access. However, that does not mean that there are other areas that are not also experiencing those things. Some of the highest impacted geographies across the country include the rural West. You'll remember seeing that sort of navy block across like Montana and Utah, all of those areas that are very far away from metropolitan centers. So you'll see the rural West, Mississippi Delta, which is predominantly Black and brown communities, Appalachia, and the Southwest. Something that we realized while we were doing this research is that there is a negative correlation between market concentration and food access as it pertains to Black and brown communities, which is to say that companies are more likely to divest and create poor food access conditions in specifically Black and brown communities. We'll see that here. We see that the rural populations that are most impacted are elders and farming communities. And this is particularly interesting for us at RAFI as an agricultural focused organization, because not only are farmers specifically struggling with food access issues, farmers also participate in SNAP. Farmers also live in super rural areas and will only have access to one grocery store. But they are also feeling that impact from a business perspective, where if they want to sell their produce to their community, they have two options really to do that. They can do it at the farmers market once a week, and it is a very high level of work for a very low return, or they can try to break into the grocery industry in the area. If the grocery industry in the area is super concentrated, like if only Walmart is in the area and Walmart's the only one who can take their produce, Walmart gets to set the price. And Walmart does not offer very fair prices. Something that I hear a lot from farmers when I talk to them about this issue, about market access issues, is we are price takers. We are not price givers. We cannot value our produce at what it's worth because grocery stores are able to set that pricing because there is no competition around them to challenge that and offer us something better. As we noted before, people of color tend to be most negatively impacted by divestitures, by concentration, by poor food access. In particular, we have noted that the data shows Native American populations and Hispanic centers are specifically most impacted by those phenomenons. I wanted to include this specific grab of our bivariate map in San Francisco. This is all of San Francisco County, and it shows Albertsons market share at 30% or higher. Now we can see that for almost the entire county, Albertsons has almost half or more of the market share. And when we look specifically in like the Western Addition neighborhoods, which is the neighborhood that Jade first got in touch with me about, having lost the Safeway, we see that this area in particular is experiencing the highest levels possible of poor food access according to our bivariate data. There are also areas that are in the area of most concern where they have the highest levels of concentration and the worst levels of food access. There are no areas that I can see here that are fully at the bottom of that diamond that we're seeing, where they have great food access and they are not at all concentrated. At the very least, there is some mix of poor food access and corporate concentration in San Francisco in general. I love this slide because it is worth remembering that the data offers us metrics. It tells us some numbers that reflect what the lived reality is, but it is all of you who are actually living in these conditions that will be able to inform that data in a more concrete way. It is your lived experience that informs this data more than the other way around. And that's something that's really important to remember when we think about advocacy and using this tool for advocacy. So I will go over some of the advocacy applications that we've used at RAFI, and I hope that it will inform some of the ways you start thinking about how you can use this tool to support the experiences that you have all shared in San Francisco. So I don't know if she's still here, but my colleague very sneakily came into this webinar. Her name is Rachel Bruner. She runs our grassroots policy work at RAFI, and she has been leading the charge on our grassroots policy engagement this year. And what that has looked like for us is gathering producers from all across North Carolina to talk about some of the issues that they're facing. And one of the things that they voted on as an area that they specifically wanted to focus on was what we call regionally rooted retail and wholesale. What that means for the producers is creating an environment that allows startup groceries to thrive, creates funnels of capital towards them, and dismantles the policy that has allowed for corporate concentration to exist in the region. So when we think about advocacy, we think about it as starting at the grassroots level and engaging with the community members who are actually feeling those impacts and allowing them to decide how they would like to address the issue. Antitrust enforcement. Jade mentioned this earlier about the Robinson-Patman Act, and antitrust enforcement, I think, will be a key pillar towards addressing this issue, particularly right now. The Robinson-Patman Act, for those of us who are not familiar, oh my gosh, I've said this so many times and sometimes it flees my mind. But, yes, it says that you are not allowed to charge discriminatory pricing despite your size. So, for example, there was a lawsuit at the FTC between Pepsi and an unnamed entity who we all knew was Walmart, but it was all redacted when they did the settlement. And what happened was Pepsi went to a company, or the company came to Pepsi and said, we will buy your product, but we will buy it only at this very, very low price point. And because of our size and because the lack of competition around us, we are able to demand that of you. So what Pepsi did, out of fear of losing their biggest customer, they said, okay, you can have that price. We will give you a bunch of free stuff on top of that price, and we will make up the difference by charging all of our smaller customers a lot more. This negatively impacts every independent and community-driven grocery store because they end up having to pay double or triple the price that corporate entities like Walmart have to pay, despite having the billions of dollars in revenue. And it makes it that much harder for community members to shop at those grocery stores because the prices are so high, and the grocery store has no other option but to charge those prices. So what the Robinson-Patman Act did and does, it says that's illegal. You cannot do that. This law already exists, but it hasn't been enforced for over 70 years. So what antitrust enforcement means is advocating for that law to be reinforced now and to have an actual standing in a court of law. one way of addressing that came out of Senator Chris Murphy's office earlier this year in a act called the Fair Prices for Small Businesses Act. This act is essentially a rewriting of the Robinson-Patman Act and modernizing it for the conditions that we live in now. It includes things like the gig economy and incorporating Instacart and DoorDash into the model of price discrimination. And it specifically targets companies that achieve a revenue of over $100 billion a year. What it doesn't say, the subtext of that, is Walmart. We're talking about Walmart. Walmart makes over $100 billion in revenue every year and should not be using its outsized market power to try and squeeze suppliers for an even lower price that ends up impacting all of the other retailers around it. The Grocery Gap Atlas was part of developing that legislation, and we had some conversations with Senator Murphy about what that data shows and how it can inform this act. So when you think about doing advocacy at perhaps a state or a federal level, you can use this data to reinforce the lived experiences that you already have on the ground or are being enforced or emphasized by your membership. And as we all know, legislators love data, they love numbers, and when you have both lived experience, anecdotes, and data, it makes a very compelling case when you work with a political office. Ultimately, corporate grocery seeks to maximize profit extraction. Their goal is not to make food access equitable. So our hope ultimately with the Grocery Gap Atlas is that it will be used by organizations, by individuals, by academic institutions to hold corporate players accountable. We would like ultimately to see a removal of obstacles for beginning community-backed food retail operations. We would like people to imagine new ways of selling food both informally and at scale. And the goal of all of that is to make food access equitable at local and national levels. I think that is everything. I have lectured you all long enough. If you have any questions, I think we'll have some time for that at the end. And I will pass it back to Jade and stop sharing my screen somehow. Yes, there we go.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And yes, we will have time for Q&A after all of our presenters. So thank you for mentioning that. But if there are questions that come up for you as someone's speaking, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can get to them later, or I'll answer them throughout the presentation. So yeah, we do have two more presenters. Celia Lobo-Gonzalez is here next. She is a San Francisco native, shout out fellow unicorn, and a worker owner at the Other Avenues Grocery Cooperative, which is the city's longest running food co-op nestled in the Outer Sunset. She's dedicated more than a decade to advancing critical food sovereignty campaigns. She lived part of her childhood in the 90s in the Western Addition neighborhood and now resides in the Outer Sunset. She serves on the board of the network of Bay Area co-ops and our FAACTS steering committee. And she is going to share with us her wealth of knowledge about grocery retail landscape in San Francisco. So I'll pass it over to you, Sophia.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, sweet. All right. Well, what I first want to say is that I'm not a historian, but I am a knowledge keeper, as we all are knowledge keepers in the best ways that we can be. So yeah, I'm gonna share a little bit about just the grocery store landscape in San Francisco, a little bit, and about co-ops, and hopefully kind of inspire some answers to the questions that Melanie had posed towards the end about creative ways forward. Yeah, I did a little bit of research in preparation for this and just winding back to like, how the landscape of grocery stores has changed in San Francisco, winding back to like the 1920s. It was more a landscape of like independent merchants and separate businesses selling bread or meat, produce, groceries. And you'd have to go to each one to get all of the things that you wanted for dinner. But also in the 20s, there was establishment of a place called the Crystal Palace Market, which was on 8th and Market, which was like a huge space, like 60,000 square feet, which kind of grouped together various individually owned departments. So now you could find, the produce, the meat, housewares on one place. It had a parking lot, but each of those sections was still independently owned. And part of that was what was known as Skaggs Grocery, which was one of the largest sections there, which later merged with Sea Lake chain in LA to become Safeway stores. And so, at the time, most of these are like generally small square footage stores. And so a little bit of the timeline with Safeway's growth, expansion, and collapse, I guess, is that in the 20s, they started with about like 29 stores. They also had Piggly Wiggly, which doesn't exist here anymore, but they had one. And then there was various other, other kind of smaller supermarkets, you could start to say, that existed. And in the 30s, they merged with mutual stores, so they grew to have about 150 stores. But they were all like small stores that were kind of scattered around the city. The Depression happened, they dropped to about 125. In the 40s, there was 60, but their total square footage had increased. So this was now kind of the post-World War II trend of fewer but larger stores in central locations with parking lots. Um, but you start to see it drop. So in the 50s, it became 35 Safeway stores. In the 70s, 24. In the 80s, 15 stores. And in 2015, Albertsons acquires Safeway. And today, I think I counted around 10. And we know that the Fillmore Safeway closed, and also now La Playa in the Outer Sunset. Um, and actually, many of these like old, smaller Safeway stores became, convenience and corner stores and other small grocers. A lot of 7-Elevens took them over. Um, which reflects, growing up in the Western Addition near Fulton and Divisadero, my family would mostly shop at like Faletti Foods, which at the time was located at the Lucky's, which is now closing. Um, and also, we would shop at Green Earth, which is still on McAllister and Divisadero, which is a Palestinian small natural grocer. Um, and yeah, that kind of also reflects, there's a lot of in the neighborhoods, Hayes Valley, Fillmore, Western Addition, and many parts of the city. There are, smaller, like many Arab-owned corner stores and other small grocers, other immigrant-owned stores, depending what neighborhood you're in and what, like cultural concentration there may be and what kind of food products people are looking for. Um, but another development too in the 60s and 70s was, this the organic food movement and food access in, the scope of like the social movements happening at the time. So yeah, and so in the 1960s and 70s, there was the shift from like World War II companies that had produced like chemicals for warfare, transitioning to agriculture, industrial agriculture, and moving their their chemicals for pesticide applications, and people wanting to, reject all of that for the, connections that it had with the war and also for their health and looking to access organic healthy foods, local organic healthy foods. And various folks, also with the like Summer of Love and this move, a lot of people coming to the city. There was folks in Haight that had, gotten together and were looking to form relationships with farmers to bring access to food, and so they developed relationships with farmers at the Alamany Farmers Market, which is like the first farmers market, so to speak, officially in, I guess, in California or the United States. And they developed those relationships, and they started like a food buying club, and they would purchase food, pick up food, take orders, share meals, and distribute. And then the whole thing was food access, and so they realized that without that expanding, just having their own group, they're sort of replicating the problem. And so that's what developed and birthed this movement called the food conspiracy, which happened in the 60s and 70s, which became a network of neighborhood food buying clubs, which was mostly in San Francisco, but had also spread to Berkeley and had some loose relationships with the Black Panther Party and in terms of their related programs like the free breakfast program. But it was a different group of people, and yeah, it was neighborhood based and relationship based, and like I mentioned, it was folks getting together once a week and taking orders for what kind of shopping would be needed, and 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 sharing meals together, talking about the politics and their relationships and everything going on, and then distributing food. And so the motto of the food conspiracy was, if you can't walk to a food conspiracy, it's time to start another food conspiracy. Um, and so that's kind of how that took off in organic ways. And but later in the 70s and early 80s, there was economic shifts that kind of disrupted that movement, that relationship, which required a shift to more brick and mortar stores. And so that's what kind of birthed what became the People's Food System, which was a network of food cooperatives in the city, which included like the San Francisco Cooperating Warehouse, chef buying clubs, and many other grocery stores. This is where Other Avenues was born, Rainbow Grocery, and Veritable Vegetable, which is produce distribution. And those three still exist. We are the last remaining companies that are from the People's Food System. Veritable Vegetables no longer a co-op. Maybe one day they'll become a co-op again, but Other Avenues and Rainbow is still a worker-owned co-op. And um, some aspects that we've talked about what the impacts or why we still exist for over 50 years. And there's a lot of factors, but um, primarily it's having really strong community support and being really responsive to the community, making sure that like what we're actually a service to the neighborhood that we're in, and understanding what a grocery store is. It's a community hub. It can be a community hub, and it's a place where people are getting nourished, primarily through food, but also through the relationships and the weaving of the neighborhood. And without that community support, there's many times where Other Avenues could have closed, and but because of those relationships, we were able to establish like personal loans from our community members, that we paid back, before they were due, and come up with creative ways to keep the doors open. Um, and the other big factor too, for the resiliency also really plays into owning the building. and being able to, through those relationships, get ourselves to a place where, as other avenues, we could purchase the building. Rainbow also, moved to that, and so that's another big factor is just being able to not be at the whims of landlords and extractive capitalism. And yeah, but again, like community support made all of that possible. Um, and yeah, some other, kind of reasons why cooperatives and cooperative grocery stores are something an answer to how to move away from, the corporate why, large grocery stores and chain grocery stores um, provide more resiliency for local communities is because they're based on, local control and, like I said, responsive to community. They're values based. We have the cooperative principles that like are rooted in um, various aspects of like for the workers, for the community members, and for the ecosystems around us, and being accountable to all of that. Um, and they're non-extractive in the sense that the wealth stays in the community. So as a worker-owned model, any profit that we make as a business gets distributed to all the workers, and we all live here, and so that all cycles through the economy and kind of compounds. And there's also through that, a direct relationship of our labor to the corporate profits. And therefore, an ability to also, um, like think about where our money is going and donate to local community organizations as well, and support each other through different creative ways. Um, and the local control aspect is also through consensus decision making and making sure that everyone is a participant in how the grocery store is operating and how it's relating to the neighborhood. And that is, diametrically opposed to kind of the way that like Kroger, something that I think is interesting that I had learned about recently was that there's been reporting that Kroger's like 35% of Kroger's profit comes from selling customer data through like loyalty cards and other information they may pick up through like using your credit card and stuff. And that's shocking, because it's like they're not even grocery stores anymore. Their data farms are becoming, it seems like there's what is the grocery store? What is the service that it's providing to you? And yeah, like other aspects too of corporate consolidation and how that affects like access to food is I don't know that this is violating the Robinson-Patman, but it would be questionable. Is just, the big box stores, right? They get volume discounts. So the more access that they or more space that they have to warehouse products, the more ability they have to, purchase at scale and get um, more discounts for the same product that smaller stores are purchasing. And so that has a real impact then on prices because the markups are different. And sometimes though, like their smaller grocery stores are marking up less than these big stores are. Um, but even then, the price can be reflected differently. So those are all just tidbits of stuff. And happy to participate more in questions and but just overall to say that the data is really interesting and a really useful tool to understand like what's going on in our communities and what are the corporate actors that are not thinking about our needs and also, not like become more rigid in the ways that they operate. Um, and the alternatives, right? Which is investing in in smaller, like rethinking the systems that we have and how can we make sure that we're supporting small grocers or independently owned, family owned, cooperative owned grocers and the whole supply chain behind them, right? To provide resiliency in our communities and make sure that everyone is accessing, being responsive to community and accessing the needs that people have and listening to them. So, yeah, I'll pass it back to Jade.
Thank you, Celia. Carry so much knowledge and appreciate you sharing that with us. And yeah, we have Miss Corey here now to talk about her experience and what it's been like to lose the Fillmore Safeway. So Miss Cora McCoy has dedicated decades of service, advocacy, and guidance for the San Francisco and Fillmore communities. Through her work as a community leader, active and dedicated church member, and Booker T Senior Advisory Council member, she has remained a beacon of care for her community. She's a dedicated volunteer and committed countless hours of board service to organizations like the NAACP, Senior and Disability Action Network, the Heritage and Music Foundation, the San Francisco General Hospital, and her lifetime membership to the Licensed Vocational Nurses League of California. Thank you so much, Ms. Cora, for being here. We'd love to hear your experience. Tell us about who you are, a little about your background, what your experience was shopping at the Safeway on Fillmore. What was your reaction when you heard that it was closing, and how have things been for you since it's closed? Um, and if you had the powers to choose what would replace that Safeway, what would you like it to be? And I know that was a bunch of questions that I threw all at once, but we've chatted about this, but feel free to share. And um, thank you again for being here.
Good morning, and thank you, Jade, and all that are present. I'm Cora McCoy, a longtime resident of San Francisco and the Western Addition community. I arrived here in 1957, and I've worked in this, retired from the city, and I'm active in the senior programs and especially here at Booker T. Washington. Food is very important in every culture, group, and organization. It's our life stem for having food. And for me, when Safeway closed, it was very devastating to the seniors and other individuals. Webster Street became a ghost town, a death valley to lose Safeway. And my feelings is that no one cared. We've lost the human touch for the really mere life-sustaining food for the community. I used the Safeway. It was very valuable in the community. Those that lived near or close by the transportation was very helpful and needed. And to lose that very, very devastating. And now it's just a vacant building, chains all around, and you feel real, real isolated. No one seems to care. When we heard about it, we fought for it, but it didn't work. It's still closed. And the community is still trying to stand fast and be prayerful that we will receive another food chain there, grocery store. And it was very helpful to be able to do banking there and to meet your neighbors and share one with the other at the Safeway. Very, very, I don't know if many have the feeling that we had a great, great loss in the community. And what I would like to see again in that area, and I know housing is short and we need housing. So if it would be housing and then a commercial space at the lower level to have a grocery store, pharmacy, banking, what is very needful in the community for seniors where you can have some independency when you get out, you can take care of your business in one location. And I would just love for that to happen again, to have a food where you can go and shop for your cultural foods there in the community where you can feel the warmth and from others that's in the same condition as many of us are, wanting and to see it just vacant and there and nobody care. And then the next news, nothing seems to be stated that will build the morale. We have to go a little further now to Lucky's, and then the next thing you hear, they're on the merge of closing. So what are we going to do? And we just band together, keep fighting, hoping, and wishing that they would see the need to bring back a beautiful food exchange for the community and for seniors, and not bring loneliness to the community. Something has to happen and take place. So thank you for allowing me to make this expression that something has to be done for our seniors that is close and met here. So thank you, Jake.
Thank you so much, Miss Cora. Really appreciate you again, and Melanie and Celia for being here, and really demonstrating irrefutable evidence, both in data and number and geospatial form, and also with your lived experience, of what's the reality in our neighborhoods. So just some love for all of you. We have a few minutes, so we might be able to squeeze in one or two questions. If anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. And it could be for any one of our speakers. I will share a recap of this meeting along with the recording. And if there are any questions that come up even after today, feel free to send those over. We'll also follow up with some specific calls to action. There's a bill about restrictive covenants right now that we can all show support for. I'll drop a link to that. I see a hand, Jackie.
Hi, my name's Jackie. I have a question for RAFI, the organization. I put it in the chat. My question is, like, for one, the data set is like beautiful, wonderful, amazing. So I got to applaud and give flowers for that. That's really amazing. And the other part, I wanted to know what is the data set percentage accuracy for what is shown?
I don't have percentages for you. The data was accrued and put together by the Data Science Institute at the University of Chicago. But if they were here, I imagine the answer they would give you is that our data is only ever good as what's recorded. So this is something that I ran into when Jade first approached me. Is we looked at San Francisco on the map, and the level of poor food access and market concentration appeared to be lower than it was in the rest of the country, but that's because it's comparing data across areas that have a higher geographical area, it has different populations. So it really is a matter of how you filter the data to reflect different scales, different populations, different specific metrics you're looking for. So as far as like a percentage of accuracy, there is nothing that's ever going to be 100% accurate, but this is part of why it's so important for people to work with the tool specifically and compare it against their lived experiences.
Thank you. And then my follow-up question with that is how was this data acquired by Chicago students?
That I don't have an answer for. That is all the Data Science Institute people. I imagine that they have some subscriptions to different data compendiums, but that would be a question for them for sure.
Okay, thank you. I think this is great information for all of us to learn because I know we all want to know these things and build off of them, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. There aren't any more questions. We can wrap here. Thank you so much for coming and attending today. We'll have more webinars, educational webinars such as these. So follow us on Instagram, join our Google group, join our Slack channel, just email me. Appreciate you all and hope to see you at another event soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.